Welcome to Delphi Economic Forum. It's a pleasure to have you all here this morning. We will discuss a very interesting but also very complex group of topics around the future of warfare, the aerospace and defense, and the new emerging technologies. We'll discuss about the geopolitical shifts and how they impact the defense industry. And with no delays, I would like to dive straight to the topics. And Mr. Kefalogiannis, who's the Deputy Minister of the Greek MOD, is with us today. Mr. Escorcia, he's the Director of the Euro-Atlantic Security and Director General of International Relations and Strategy for the Ministry of Armed Forces of France. Welcome. Mr. Randy Howard, the Vice President of Global Pursuits at Lockheed Martin Aeronautics. Good morning, Mr. Howard. And of course, Mr. Nikolaos Papatsas, the Senior Partner at EFA Group, and also the President of Hellenic Aerospace Security and Defense Industries Group. Mr. Papatsas, good morning. So, Mr. Kefalogiannis, if I may, Yanni, I will refrain myself from asking what the future of warfare is, because I think it would be more appropriate to ask this question to the Oracle of Delphi. But we know that there are lessons that we learn from the conflict zones of Ukraine, from Caucasus, from the Middle East. And I was wondering, how do we incorporate those lessons at national level, of course, in the Hellenic Armed Forces, and how do you plan to incorporate them in the future?
First of all, let me thank you for giving me the opportunity to comment on such interesting issues. And in my view, modern wars, and particularly the Russia-Ukrainian conflict, will transform the way that nation-states will be prepared for conflicts in the decades to come. And if I may say, there are four main lessons learned by all these conflicts that you referred. First of all, on how we invest our defense industrial base and the international alliance in order to guarantee plentiful access to war material. Mm-hmm. A second lesson is that we should revisit the way that we train our war forces and make them generate and disseminate battlefield-relevant data to their units. A third lesson is that we have to reconsider the training of the soldiers for combat and the transformation of civilians to soldiers, and of course, civilian infrastructure for war. And
sorry, is this relevant to the Finnish model that we are
talking
about lately?
Exactly, yes, mm-hmm. Yes. It has a relevance. Mm-hmm. And a third lesson is that we have to revise the way that we choose the weapon systems that unfortunately are not, they are limited. Mm-hmm. So, in order to mention some examples, we've seen that Starlink satellites, drones, smartphones have given a great advantage to the Ukrainian units, infantry units in the battlefield, and made a great combination with artillery attacks. In the air, we've seen that extensive ground-to-air defense systems have constrained both sides from using their air forces. We've seen in the sea that the Russian fleet, especially in the Black Sea, was very vulnerable to attacks because of the aging systems and designs that they have. So all these lessons will be transferred in specific guidelines that we in the Defense Ministry will have in the next few months.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Escorcia, Alexandre, if I may. Recently, Charles Michel, the President of the European Council, said that Europe should prepare for war. Do you see that this is something that we should really be ready for, given the latest geopolitical shifts in our wider region?
Well, certainly there is a lot to be prepared to, that we need to be prepared for. And the minister talked about Ukraine, and there are indeed some valuable lessons learned there, not least the innovative spirit of the Ukrainians, as minister said. But let's not forget the ever-present risk of escalation in the Middle East. Let's not forget also revisionist powers who seek to subvert to their advantage the rules-based international order. And of course, terrorism, consequences of the rise of China, long-term climate change, and all of these things. So I think we do not have the luxury of ignoring that kind of strategic environment that we have in Europe, and as Europeans trying to increase our defense readiness, as the European institutions put it. And I think it's one area in which France and Greece need to be together and front and center. And one aspect of that is what we call the war economy, which needs actually to be and to go wider and to outlast even the conflict in Ukraine, if and when it finally is over. This idea that we need to be able to produce fast enough the kit that our armies may need in an engagement, and to do it with our transatlantic friends whenever possible, but as Europeans whenever necessary. And France, is putting their money where our mouth is in this regard, as you know, with our military programming law that foresees 413 billion euros out to 2030. That's a doubling of our defense budget between 2017 and 2030. But of course, it only works if we do it collaboratively with others. We are very convinced of that. Only in very reduced areas do we go alone, particularly in the nuclear area, but in all others, we are seeking collaborative projects with our Greek friends, with our German friends, with Spain, with others. And this is also what we need to do to defend, to go beyond words and really be ready to confront any contingency that may befall us. And I think the role at the European level is to incentivize, to encourage, to take into account the specificities of the defense sector, which is a very specific sector. And I think that the proposals that are on the table, on the side of the Commission, go a long way towards that and towards addressing what we need to do. And again, this is something that's with us to stay. So this war economy footing needs to be preserved and to be sustained in the longer run.
Rand, we are talking about emerging technologies in aerospace, and my question is, how do you see the next generation of air dominance, and what capabilities are we looking for to be successful?
Thanks for the question. Good morning. Like the Deputy Minister, I appreciate the opportunity to be here. Lockheed Martin is honored by a strategic long-term relationship we've had with the Hellenic Air Force, the Ministry of Defense, the people of Greece, and so it's good to be with you this morning. So the future of the next generation of air dominance is really your question. And as a fighter aircraft guy standing here, that's kind of been my world for most of my life. You probably think that I'm thinking about the next generation of an F-35, for instance, and where the previous panel mentioned the LOA that has been recently delivered here. We're thankful for that. But there will be next generations of aircraft, right? And we're designing those now. We're competing for those now at Lockheed Martin. Other U.S. and international industries are creating and developing their own set of aircraft. There's an unmanned solution that goes along with it. So what in the U.S. we have started terming collaborative combat air, which is manned and unmanned or crewed and uncrewed systems, will be a big part of the future. And certainly stealth will be a big part of the future, and speed will be a big part of the future. But in my mind, when you think about what's going to be required to have real air dominance, it's freedom of movement. And so you have to think about this through all the domains, through sea, ground, air, and space, and cyber. And you've got to think about, how do I connect all of that up to create real-time environment information flow that puts us and Western nations, puts the good side here on the inside of the OODA loop of our adversaries. So the observe, orient, decide, and act. To be able to do that and have the speed and agility and information flow That's what, in my mind, is going to be required to create air dominance. And I think it's incredibly important as we think about our future. It's an increasingly dangerous world. If you look at where, if you were just to focus on China for just a moment, 10 years ago when this forum started, the US had the largest Navy. Today, 10 years later, China has the largest Navy, and that gap is expanding. And it's a nation that's putting seaports and bases in the middle of the ocean, expanding their endeavor to have some control over air and sea lanes. And so for us to truly have air dominance as a Western world, as a set of allies, we have to connect it all up. And we've got to do it together. We can't do this alone. And I think that's the real message that I would leave with us today is we must be connected, and we must be interoperable, and we have to do this together.
Thank you. Nikos, we've been witnessing geopolitical and geoeconomical shifts in our region, and how do these affect the defense industry and the defense capabilities of Europe?
Thank you very much, also for inviting me to be here. I think the two important things we need to look at from these latest geopolitical developments is what has been happening in our neighborhood, and I must say that history always teaches important lessons. We have to go back and look at our continent and actually the Europe and Asia continent. If you draw a line from the Baltics to the Black Sea, down to the Mediterranean, and all the way down to the Red Sea, if you really were to draw this line, you will see that this over history has shown that there's been a lot of conflicts. And we live in an area that's conflicts. I don't believe in any other part of the world you will see where East meets West, as I would say, with a lot of problems. You see, it used to be the trade that used to happen from Asia to Europe. It was also the Silk Road, as they call it, where silk used to come in our continent. But nevertheless, the history lesson shows that there is a great aspirations, especially from Russia, to go back and capture maybe some of the previous countries that it had under its belt. So this has created many problems. This is the first lesson that we learned from this geopolitical crisis. The second lesson was that NATO is not there to cater strictly for the security of Europe. So Europe all of a sudden had a wake-up call. We had over 30 years of where there was less investment in defense systems. I think if somebody looks at economic statistics, they will notice that outside of 10 countries in the NATO, which they spend approximately 2% of the GDP. If you look at those countries, all are small. Greece is one of them. I think it's Lithuania and some others. Great Britain is almost the only one that is larger than all of those. So there's been almost $1.5 trillion, based on some figures, that has not been invested if we assume the 2% of the GDP over the last 30 years. So that has created a gap. What is a gap? We don't have good investment in the defense industry. NATO proven that cannot be the safety of Europe. Some of the larger powers, yes, they are able to take some missions, but not without the NATO assistance. And so all this has to change in the European Union. What does that mean? That we have to go into a new road. There has been time that is lost, and we have to make it up. And this is some of the new defense policies that we see in the EU. At the same time, though, we have to grapple with an environment where, as you know, the economic union has not transformed really into what I will call the European military, or the joint operations, or as I will call the being able to make common investments in defense equipment. So all this needs to change now, and there is no time really So everything has to happen fast. I think we talk greatly about the European defense industry, but we must look at the lessons learned from the US industry. There was consolidation back in the 80s where smaller companies became part of larger groups in order to create defense systems. Europe needs to do the same thing. We need to have a consolidation in the defense industry. We have too many people making ships, aircraft, or larger systems. So we got to do that in order to avoid having duplication of efforts. And of course, being part of NATO and being part of a collaborative approach within European Union, we need to think about the interoperability. Randy mentioned that. Mm-hmm. We need to think about joint operations. We need to think about training and maintenance. You cannot do this with too many systems. You cannot do this with countries, each of the individual countries making their own choices on how they will go about defense systems. So I think these are the changes that are expected to be effected in the defense industry, and this is what needs to be done in order to go forward.
Nikos, you talked about a common defense industry in Europe, in the European Union, but Ioannis, why is it so hard for Greece to build a competitive defense industry? We've been trying for the last 50 years, and we're still trying, but it seems to be too hard for us.
First of all, it depends what we define as competitive defense industry. For example, one might think that this means that we will be able to design, manufacture, and mass product and export a new F-35. This is not the case for the Greek defense industry today. The question on the one hand is how we'll increase the percentage of domestic industrial production and technology in the support, maintenance, and the modernization of existing and future weapon systems. And on the other hand, how we'll effectively integrate the ecosystem of private Greek industries that produce technology and innovation into the current and future needs of the Greek armed forces. And I don't like zeroing. We have a troubled state defense industry, although there is a consolidation plan that has been launched in the last few weeks, maybe months. But at the same time, we have over 100 Greek companies that are related to the defense industry that employs more than 20,000 employees. So the next day of the defense industry plan is that we have to take into consideration their active partnership. So, for example, the Defense Innovation Center that we're now planning and we're creating aims to integrate and orient this ecosystem in giving us specific solutions that will meet the needs of the Greek armed forces. And these needs will be met both at the level of production and maintenance and support of the weapon systems. We have the manpower in order to design all these smart and high-end programs, even from drones to robotics and artificial intelligence. But what we lack is the institutional framework and the mentality that this will bind us all. I mean, the political system, the military leadership, the military and civilian educational research centers, in order to make products for our defense industry.
Thank you. Alexandre, how close are we to achieving a strategically autonomous Europe? I think it's the $1 million question right now, but it's been in discussion for so many years. How close are we?
Well, first of all, I would like to make a few compliments further to what some colleagues said. I don't pretend that France is a very big country, but it is at 2% in 2024, so I think you can count it in the list of fairly big countries that make it that mark. And 2.03 to be exact are the figures that we just gave to NATO. And it's not just about the figure. It's about what my minister calls 2% that are really useful and efficient on the military side, and it means how much you invest. And we are at 30%, over 30% investment. With whom and for what? And this brings us closer to the answer, I think, to your question, because when, for example, we revive some production lines that had been cut, such as powder, for example, and President Macron inaugurated a new factory this week in Bergerac to do just that. When you revive and you accelerate the production of things such as artillery pieces like the César, you are able to respond to those needs and in the end to be, where necessary, more autonomous. So this is also what we're trying to do actually with our Greek friends in proposing partnerships that, as Minister said, emphasize co-production and innovation and joint innovation. And I think this is an area in which in the future we can really work. And this is, in a way, the bottom-up approach to strategic autonomy. Strategic autonomy is not an absolute. It's not something that you attain overnight. It's a relative, and it depends in the areas. The important thing is who do you want to work with, and how do you make sure that if you enter dependencies or codependencies, they are well known, they are identified, and they are not something that is imposed upon you. And it's something in the end that is also reinforcing the transatlantic partnership, because the two legs of the transatlantic partnership needs to be strong enough for that partnership to be sustained, including in political changing winds or whatever. And this is really what our agenda is about.
Mm-hmm. Randy, you mentioned the LOA for the F-35 that is already in the hands of the Greek MOD, but since we're talking for the F-35, what lessons do we take from the development of programs as the F-35 when it comes to the structure of the future air dominance programs in order to ensure that they will be successful?
Yeah, thanks for that. So I think any successful program starts with robust, well-defined requirements. And I think the F-35 was an example of that. Incredibly complex program, 3 different variants of aircraft, U.S. and 8 international partner nations with additional countries coming in, but starting with a robust set of requirements that allow for flexibility at the same time, that create an environment where you can have an open systems architecture kind of driven program. So over time, as technology changes, you're able to insert new technologies with minimal disturbance along the way. That's a lot of what you may hear something about Tech Refresh 3 and Block 4, which is the variant that is being offered here, the latest, most updated F-35 being offered here for Greece. A big part of what we're doing in Tech Refresh 3 and Block 4 is integrating an open systems architecture solution into the computers that drive the F-35 and fly it. So, and the other thing I think about is digital transformation. So as we, in the 21st century world we live in, a developmental program, you have to think about this thing in terms of digital, using today's digital capabilities. And so we see across the spectrum with our U.S. customers, both Air Force, Army, Navy, Marine Corps, whatever it is, there's varying degrees of that digital transformation that have gone on. And as we look around the world with our customers internationally, again, some countries are very much digitally transforming and others are lagging behind. But to the extent that we can all get ourselves on the same page in real time, understand the requirements, and lean into those requirements, and then be flexible as we develop the program so we can rapidly prototype and put flyable solutions, in my case, flyable solutions out into the field that have no testing, but minimal actual flight testing, and a lot of that simulation that we're using artificial intelligence and digital transformations solutions to field those aircraft as quickly as possible.
Mm-hmm. Nikos, what are your thoughts on the policies of the European Union to deal with the current challenges in the fields of armaments, of producing weapon systems, of funding industries to produce? As Alexandre said, there is an ongoing effort to produce like 1 million shells for Ukraine. How do you feel about those policies?
Well, as I mentioned before, I think the geopolitical crisis is what transpired and showed some of the problems that we had in European Union in dealing with defense. The defense industry, as we correctly mentioned, is very fragmented. I think we need to have a unification. The European Union took the act to say that, to try to revive the European defense industry, and to that they came up with some new policies as part of what initially was called a DIRPA, which was the rapid, try to go into a rapid reaction. There it was appropriated about 300 million euros in order to purchase ammunition because it proven that in Ukraine, ammunition was the number one, what was required. Everybody depleted their stocks, so they had to replace their stocks. But then European Union, early this year, as everybody's aware, or some of you that are not aware, came out with the European Defense Industrial Policy. And what this policy says is they set up some metrics and what needs to happen in order for Europe to become more autonomous and be able to defend themselves. So in this idea, the European Union will fund at least with 1.5 billion various common procurement programs, as they call them, in order to get common defenses. It's also talked about 100 billion being spent until 2035. I believe this is going to have a lot of challenges as part of European politics until it becomes a reality. Nevertheless, this goes and shows you the will that, of what we're planning to move forward. And just to go back to the European Defense Industrial Policy, the metrics that the European Union has set is they want approximately 50% of the defense systems purchased by the countries to be EU manufactured. And that number needs to increase to 60% by 2035. So in my mind, and I must say to Randy, it used to be the Buy American Act. So now we're going to make the EU Buy Act. But I think it's in the right direction. It's the only way that really the European defense industry can develop. And the unification, of course, in the common procurements is something that, as I mentioned before, is not going to only drive towards interoperability, but it's going to lower the investments that are required in acquiring defense systems and in maintaining defense systems over time, training, and so on and so on. Of course, the biggest challenge that we still have in the European Union is how we do this Europe army, which we have not done politically yet to try to develop. We did develop the economies, a common economy, and we almost have a common currency for everybody. But the European army, I think the idea of having a European army had been far away, and I'm not so sure the will is there, the political will yet, and this is what EU needs to change in order to have it.
Ioannis, the Ministry of Defense is currently developing a 12-year long plan for armaments. And to put it, as Mr. Diakopoulos said in the previous panel, are we planning the right way? Do we expect to see more autonomous systems? Are you changing the doctrine of the Hellenic Armed Forces?
In fact, yes, there is a process of re-evaluation and prioritization of the needs for the next at least 12 years. And this process is made by the military leadership. And I want to be clear on this issue. We politicians are not the experts. We have to follow the proposals made by the military leadership. But our duty is to try to prepare this 12 years program in a way that will not exceed the fiscal constraints made by the budget, of course. So it is obvious that we have to absorb the lessons learned by the current and recent conflicts in our area. One priority is the homogenization as much as possible of the types of the weapon systems that we use. For example, the aircrafts or even the drones. A second priority is to maintain and to increase the availability of the weapon systems it's not a secret that, for example, we have a problem with our fleet of transport helicopters and aircrafts. A third priority is the modernization of the weapon systems. For example, the frigates is very high on our agenda. And the fourth axis is that the new program that we are planning has to develop at the same time domestic weapon systems, the ones that I referred, of course with the synergies with the private industrial base that we have here in Greece. And at the same time, we try to make the best use of the framework and of course the funds that are available in the European Union.
Mm-hmm. Alexandre, Nikos mentioned the European Army. Do you think a European army could also fuel the European defense industry? Is it time to discuss about building a European army right now?
Well, certainly, I mean, there's been historically progress in a common security and defense policy with a lot of operations, including today at sea, the operation Aspides, in which actually Greece and France and Italy and others work hand in hand to secure our sea lanes of communication that are critical to our economic prosperity. So this work needs to continue. Operational engagements also in Africa, in our European neighborhood, the efforts that the European Union is making to train Ukrainian armed forces, all of those are significant efforts which, by the way, should be better communicated to our publics. Whether that leads in the future to a common European army is indeed a question of political will, probably a question of our European polity integrating even more than it is today. We are, after all, in an ever closer union. So it is, a longer-term perspective. But I think what we can do in the meanwhile, building on everything that has been said, including the initiatives by the Commission, etc., is continuing to work more and do more together, which, by the way, will bring about, I think, the industrial consolidation that Nikos was mentioning, and also pursuing funding, because funding is of the essence, obviously, also at European level, including innovative approaches for funding, and there have been ideas of bonds or things of that nature. These are worth exploring, because funding will be, in the end, also the name of the game. And we need to increase, and this goes a bit to your question, ownership by our publics. We are, after all, in a European campaign election, and people are consistently for more European defense, but what does that mean? That is a nice and important, I think, political topic for a European debate. What we see is that our competitors, close and farther away from us, are not waiting, that they are upping their game, that strategic competition has sharpened, and that we need to be together also with our transatlantic friends, but also as Europeans, in order to confront this more dangerous environment.
Mm-hmm. Randy, we've been talking about interoperability between assets, between weapon systems, and since we're moving to a more integrated ecosystem, how should we see a collaborative warfare across nations, across services? Is this the actual future of warfare, as we mean?
Thanks. Let me just, before I answer that, I'll get to it real quickly, but for Nick and his comment about Europe, Lockheed Martin's all on board with that, by the way. It's the F-35, think about the F-35, Ford fuselage we're now producing in Finland, the center fuselage we're producing in Germany, the wings we produce in Italy. There's a final assembly facility in Italy, and the aft is produced in the UK. The F-35 is a European product in so many ways. And so here in Greece, we've had decades-long relationship with HAI, who produces parts of every F-16 that goes out around the world. So all on board with that. But if you think about, your question is kind of an ecosystem, and how do we do this together? I actually think that Lockheed Martin's greatest responsibility for the next 10 to 15 years is to figure that out, right? To how do we bring our nations together to create strategic deterrence so that we don't have to fight a war. It's all about deterrence. And the way we do that, in my view, is create from under the water on the water, on the ground, in the air, out to space, cyber-secured, overlapping nodes, an integrated collective allied force. And then we exercise it and we show it to the world so the world knows they don't want any part of it. We have to do that. Lockheed Martin, because we have relationships across the Air Force, the Army, the Navy, the Marine Corps, and 60, 70 plus countries around the world across our 4 business areas, I believe certainly we are putting a lot of time and attention into doing that so we can have an integrated allied capability that, as I said earlier, moves information much faster than our competitors can.
Nikos, since you represent a big group of defense industry companies, I would like to ask you what are the new technologies that, according to your thoughts, will affect the future warfare?
Okay. If I'm allowed to make one comment, if you look at the European defense industry landscape, you will find out that the largest European companies are almost 30% of the size of the US companies. This goes to show you, even though we are almost the same, let's say, volume of market, same approximately number of people living in both continents. So this goes to show you the fragmentation that exists, and this is what we got to solve. Now, going forward to the new technologies, I always said that the last 15 years, the military or the defense has seen and adopted a lot of the technologies that came from the commercial world. I think the big data, the cloud technologies, computing, which develop graphics, and very recently, as Randy mentioned, Starlink, which was a commercial product, helped Ukraine to have communications. Otherwise, they wouldn't be lost. So we're talking about the commercial world here, even when we talk about 4G or 5G technologies finding their way into the defense sector. Now, going forward, things are different. And as we've seen, we have some new technologies now. The advent of the UAVs obviously means that some of the technologies that came from the commercial world have also become the most prolific. The proliferation of these technologies into autonomous systems, into actually cheaper systems being accessed by bad guys, need for us to change how we think. Artificial intelligence, I think, is going to be the big part. Autonomous systems, space, of course, cyber security, for sure. And I must say hyper technologies in the missiles, as well as quantum technologies. I mean, the quantum phenomena is something that has been studied for a long time, and I believe this is a great field where further investment needs to be made in exploiting what quantum phenomena are bringing in, and this, I believe, it's a good collaboration between the US, the European Union, and its allies. I think this is what is going to bring the edge.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Nikos. Thank you, everybody. We're out of time, so thank you very much for being here with us. Please stay for the next panel with Mr. Vasilis Nedos. Thank you.